Hi guys, and welcome to the Is It Worth It for the AMX 1357. Although technically this is the AMX 1357 GF that you're currently looking at. You can see that from the Go Fast stripes on the WGLeague.net. The GF stands for Grand Finals. This is a tank that was made available for a limited period of time around, I think it was around March of this year. I picked it up then, and today I logged into the World of Tanks website and I noticed that the AMX 1357 was available for sale. Now, technically, I could buy that tank as well, and I would have the AMX 1357 GF and the AMX 1357 in my garage as two different tanks, but there's no point. I'm not going to be doing that because this is exactly the same tank as the tank that went on sale today. So let's start with the history of the tank, and this is going to be quick because I haven't been able to find a lot of information regarding the 1357 as it was just a prototype. But after World War II, France began to rebuild its armoured forces. They recognised that armoured warfare had progressed, favouring mobility and firepower over armour. They commissioned a new line of light and medium tanks, and they had a primary requirement that these tanks needed to be light enough to be airlifted easily so they could be deployed quickly wherever they were needed, and also they could do things like support paratroopers. One of the companies that responded to the request was the Atelier de Construction d'Issy-les-Moulineaux, or AMX for short. Apologies to any French speakers out there for my pronunciation. But AMX began with a prototype testbed called the AMX-12T. The AMX-12T is familiar because we have it in game, and it's called 12T because it weighed 12 tons, as it was light enough to be airlifted. But this tank was simply just a test bed. It never made it into production. It was developed between 1946 and 1952 and underwent many changes during that time. By the time it was ready for production, the tank had increased in weight from 12 tons to 13 tons and became the Char 13, or as we know it, the AMX 13. It was decided that the tank should have a 75mm gun, and therefore it became the AMX 1375. The AMX 1375 was quite successful. It was manufactured between 1952 and 1966, by which time it was upgunned to a 90mm and became the AMX 1390. Later, other variants came, including the AMX 13105, which was obviously an AMX 13 with a 105mm gun. But basically, over 7,700 AMX 13 and AMX 13 variants were built between 1952 and 1985, with about half of those exported to other countries. Just as a point of interest, the autoloader AMX tanks all had two magazines. They were all designed with two magazines, and that went for the AMX 12T all the way back in 1946 up till the AMX 13105. That meant that the firepower was actually double what it is in game in World of Tanks. In other words, an autoloader like the AMX 1390 would have been able to fire twice as many shots before having to reload because it actually had two magazines. In real life, after firing, the ammo drums had to be manually reloaded from outside the tank by the crew, which explains why French autoloading tanks don't need loaders in their crews. But getting back to this tank, it seems that there was some experimentation with the AMX-13 during the 1950s. One version of the tank used a Chaffee turret and gun, and another version of the tank was a version that used a 57mm, the AMX 1357, this tank. But as I say, not a lot is known, but here, have a picture of the tank. It's about all I can find on it. This is the AMX 13 with the 57mm L100, and according to this one and only picture I can find, it seems to have been developed around 1957, but never made it to production. So I usually like to compare whatever premium tank I'm reviewing against its premium tank rivals. Now, the AMX 1357 does have one rival. It's the Chinese Type 62, another Tier 7 premium light tank. But I like my light tanks. I happen to have some Tier 7 light tanks sitting around in the garage, so I've thrown them up here just to keep things in context. Unfortunately, I didn't like the 1375, the other regular French Tier 7 light tank, enough to keep it, and I'm not going to rebuy it just for the purposes of the review. We can take a look at that tank in Tanks GG a little bit later. But we're going to be comparing the 1357 against the Type 62, the T-71 and the Bulldog for the Americans, and the LTTB for the Russians. Starting off with the hit points, 890 hit points is fairly average for a Tier 7 light tank. Nothing special here. It gets more hit points than tanks like the Type 62, but not by much. far more hit points than the T71 actually, but less hit points than the Bulldog or the LTTB. It also gets 10 less hit points than the regular in-game AMX 1375. So yeah, hit points, it's not bad, it's pretty average, not the best, not the worst. When it comes to weight, it is definitely a positive because light tanks usually like to be light, and it comes in at about 15 tons for me, which is kind of ironic because it's an AMX 13 ton. But it comes in, as I say, at about 15 tons, which makes it the lightest of all the tanks up here. Only the T71 gets anywhere close. So being light and a light tank is usually good, assuming it gets a good engine. But unfortunately, the AMX 1357 gets a 250 horsepower engine, which is incredibly poor. It is the worst engine by a huge margin over any of the light tanks up here. I mean, some of the light tanks have an engine that's 3 times more powerful. So the engine is not very good on the AMX 1357, even though it's the lightest tank. And that means the power to weight ratio is only about 17, and that makes it the worst power to weight ratio of any of the light tanks up here. So yeah, it's definitely not a quick tank to accelerate. It's going to struggle going up hills as well, so the engine power is a big negative. When it comes to speed, again, nothing special here. It's pretty average. On paper it looks quite good, but remember we've got a poor horsepower to weight ratio, but 61 kilometers an hour looks okay. It's actually a little bit faster by 1 kilometer over the Type 62, but slower than the other 3 tanks. But it's not a slow tank, so I would say it's not the worst. It's just about average, maybe even slightly below average. When it comes to traverse speed, again, nothing special here. 3 of the other tanks have it well beaten, 48 degrees per second. It's very similar traverse speed to the LTTB, but on the low side. So again, below average. It's nothing special. When it comes to armor, the armor is actually a positive because, as you can see here, we get 50 millimeters of frontal hull armor, 20 on the sides, 15 on the rear. That's more hull armor than any of the other tanks up here, with the exception of the LTTB. So the hull armor is actually better on this tank than it is on the Type 62, the T71, or the Bulldog. The turret armor frontally is 40 millimeters. Now that is a little bit worse than the Type 62, but beats both American tanks hands down. And of course the LTTB is pretty much a medium tank as regards armor. But yeah, the armor is surprising, and also the armor is it gets similar turret armor to the AMX 1375, but it actually gets 10 millimeters more frontal hull armor than the AMX 1375 gets, so that's kind of surprising. It does get a little bit more armor, but you know, just to keep things in context, we're talking about a tier 7 light tank here. This tank doesn't get special matchmaking. It will see tier 10s, and you know, even tier 7s, tier 8s, tier 9s, tier 10s, you know, 50 millimeters of armor is next to nothing. So you're going to get hit, and it's going to be very rare the tank bounces any shots. When it comes to turret traverse, unfortunately, it's again nothing special here. It's a 45 degrees per second. Most of the other tanks have it beaten, with the exception of the T71, which is slightly slower. So again, not spectacular, not a strength, not a weakness, just average. When it comes to view range is quite good. It gets 390 meters of view range. That's similar to the Type 62 or the LTTB, but both American tanks have it beaten. But yeah, view range is okay, but again, considering it does see tier 10s, maybe the view range could have been a little bit better. And then we get the signal range, which is finally a positive. We finally got a positive for this tank. It gets the best signal range of any of the tanks up here, but so far the stats on paper don't look amazing. The tank really doesn't look amazing. It's average to below average on most areas. There's definitely nothing strength-wise that stands out. However, one hidden stat that isn't included on any of the statistics sites and isn't included in the garage is that the AMX 1357 has one of the best camo ratings in-game. I mean, the camo rating on this tank is exceptionally good. A lot of people think the AMX 1390, the tier 8 French light tank, is one of the best camo ratings for a light tank in the game. Not true. The AMX 1357 has a better camo rating than the AMX 1390 has. But the camo rating on this tank is incredibly good, and you can use it, you can abuse it. So that is one thing that really surprised me about the AMX 1357. But as we so often discover, the stats in the garage don't tell the whole story, especially when it comes to armor. So we're in Tanks GG going to take a closer look at this armor profile, and in the garage we have 50 millimeters of frontal armor, and that means that the frontal armor on this light tank is quite good for a light tank compared to the others. But yeah, not the whole story, because we only have 50 millimeters of armor on this narrow strip between the upper and lower glacis. In actual reality, we've got 35 millimeters of armor on the lower glacis, 21 on the upper glacis, the upper hull is only 15 millimeters thick. Now, it is incredibly well angled, but even angled, it's still only 15 millimeters thick. The turret ring is only 30 millimeters to 31, 32 on the sides. The turret itself is only 34. I mean, it's next to impossible. I mean, you could potentially bounce a shot if something hits you at an incredibly bad angle, but don't count on it. The tracks do count as 20 millimeters of spaced armor, so I suppose technically it's possible for your tracks to eat shots, but don't count on it. Side of the tank is pretty much 20 millimeters all around, and even if they do hit you in the tracks and the side, it's only going to be 40 millimeters. Rear of the tank, nothing special either. 20 at the back of the turret and 15 at the back of the hull. So yeah, the armor is far worse than it is in the garage. This tank has no armor. So while we're still in Tanks GG, let's compare the AMX 1357 Tier 7 Premium Light Tank against the AMX 1375, the regular Tier 7 French light tank in-game, just to see if there are any major differences. Obviously, both tanks are using a different gun, so there are bound to be differences, but are the differences very big? Let's find out. When it comes to firepower, the 1357 has a slight advantage, slightly more DPM, but the two tanks are so close it's almost unnoticeable. Just like the penetration. The penetration on the AMX 1375 is technically better, but it's only better by 1 millimeter, almost unnoticeable. The first major difference happens when we take a look at the damage, because obviously the AMX 1357 is a 57 millimeter. It only has 90 alpha damage compared to 135 alpha damage with a 75 millimeter on the AMX 1375. When it comes to rate of fire, the AMX 1357 gets the advantage as well with an incredible 21.5 rounds a minute compared to 14.2 on the AMX 1375. However, the reload is identical on both tanks, so even though it's a different gun, the clip reload or the magazine reload is identical on both tanks. And speaking about clips, the clip size is also different. We've got 8 rounds in the clip in the AMX 1357 compared to 6 rounds in the AMX 1375. Also, the reload time between shots is very different. It's only a 1 second reload between shots on the AMX 1357, 2 seconds between shots on the AMX 1375. So 8 shots and 6 shots on both tanks. So what that basically translates to is it means that you can unload your entire clip on the 1357 in 7 seconds. So it takes 7 seconds to unload your entire clip, and because the time between shots is 2 seconds on the AMX 1375, it means it takes you 10 seconds to unload your entire clip. So 7 seconds versus 10 seconds, big difference between the two tanks. Also, the difference in alpha damage and the number of shots you have has a small difference, because when you unload your clip in the 1357, assuming you hit and pen every shot, it means you can do potential burst damage per clip of 710. Now compare that to the AMX 1375, which only has 6 shots. It has a longer time to unload its clip, but it does get more alpha damage, and that alpha damage, if you hit and pen all 6 shots, with that alpha damage, it means that the burst damage is actually about 810, so you actually do about 100 more damage per clip with the AMX 1375. But other than that, yeah, the other major differences, shell velocity is slightly quicker on the AMX 1375 or 1357, but yeah, very, very close. I mean, 1,000 meters per second is still very good on the 1375. Difference is probably almost unnoticeable. The ammo capacity looks much better on the AMX 1357 than it does on the 1375. When it comes to weapons handling, overall I think the weapons handling is slightly better on the AMX 1357 with regards accuracy. Accuracy is identical on both tanks, even though it looks different here. We've got green for some reason, but 0.35 accuracy on both tanks. However, the soft stats, the accuracy after moving, tank traverse, turret traverse, etc., is just slightly better on the 1357, but probably almost unnoticeable. But what is noticeable is even though both tanks have exactly the same aim time, and the aim time is not amazing, but it's okay. Unfortunately, the aim time on the 1357, even though it's identical, is worse. And the reason it's worse is because you've got a 1 second reload between shots, and the fact you can reload after 1 second, but it takes you 2.2 seconds to reload or to aim, means that you reload far faster than you can actually aim, so that can cause you to miss shots. When you consider the reload is 2 seconds on the AMX 1375 and the aim time is 2.2, those two are far more closely matched, so I think maybe the aim time is a lot better on the 1375 as a result. I do find if you're firing as soon as you reload, you're going to be missing a lot more shots on the 1357. Continuing on, movement speed, identical top speed, identical reverse speed between the two tanks. The AMX 1375 gets more horsepower, gets 300 horsepower engine compared to 250. That means the power to weight ratio is much better on the 1375. We get 20 horsepower to weight ratio compared to 17 on the 1357. The terrain resistance, however, is slightly worse, just again slightly worse, probably unnoticeable between the two tanks on hard and medium terrain. On soft terrain, both tanks are identical. Turret traverse is slightly faster on the AMX 1375, but again, it's just slightly, probably unnoticeable. The tank traverse speed is 48 degrees per second on the 1357, but again, this is inaccurate. A fully upgraded AMX 1375, the traverse speed is actually a little bit better, but I haven't worked it out in my head yet. And other than that, the armor, as you can see, technically the armor is better on the AMX 1357, but as we just saw in the armor profile, the armor is absolutely garbage. 50 millimeters only refers to a tiny strip across the front. The view range is identical on both tanks, the signal range is identical on both tanks, and the fire chance of fire is slightly higher on the 1357. But to all intents and purposes, I think the two tanks are almost identical. They play almost identically, but I just felt that the AMX 1375 had a slight advantage as regards horsepower, speed, and acceleration, but it's been a long time since I played that tank, so don't quote me on that. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about this gun because it is completely unique. There is no other gun in the game quite like the 57mm L100. It is the only tank, or the AMX 57 is the only tank in the game that this gun is mounted on, and it makes the tank completely unique. I mean, you've got 8 shells, you've got 1 second between each shell. The fact you can unload this magazine in 7 seconds to 710 damage is incredibly good. It's a lot of fun. The penetration, we touched on it, 143 is not amazing. I mean, you're going to be facing tier 10s, and when you try and face tier 10s with 143 millimeters of penetration, you are going to struggle. I mean, sometimes you're going to struggle even against weak spots on tier 10s or higher tier tanks. The premium ammo is, again, it's not great, but it's okay. It is 195 millimeters of penetration, same 90 alpha damage, and it's APCR. So the premium ammo will help you out, and I do recommend carrying premium ammo on this tank because, as I say, you're going to get it into tier 10 games where even 143 millimeters is not good enough. So here we are in Kharkov, where I've just taken out an E50M with 2 shots into a side with regular AP. So 143 millimeters of penetration is just fine. I've gone for a reload, and I've just noticed that Jagdpanzer E100 has fired. So we're in a tier 10 game on a city map. Not always the best circumstances for this tank, but the Jagdpanzer E100 has fired. We're doing 55 kilometers an hour, and this guy, I should be able to scoot around him. There we go. He doesn't have time to fire. What we've got is regular AP. I'm going to switch to third person here. But I've got regular AP. You can see an orange reticule, and I'm shooting into the rear of a Jagdpanzer E100, and I can't pen him. Yep, so 8 shots can't pen the tier 10 in his weak spot. So I've switched to premium ammo, and I'm just waiting to reload. We're getting there. 15-second reload, guys. Okay, we've reloaded, and now we can do damage. And we finally take him out. So, yeah, 2 tier 10 tanks killed in that particular game, but in tier 10 games, your regular AP is not good enough against some tier 10s. You're going to have to fire premium, and even then you're going to have to fire premium at their weak spots. But yeah, I mean, the accuracy is good for an autoloader. It's 0.37 here, but as you saw, it's more like 0.35 when you're got a 100% crew. The aim time is not amazing at 2.3 in the garage. Again, it's about 2.2 when you've got a 100% crew. But yeah, when you manage your aim time, when you let the gun aim in fully, I think it is a pretty good sniper, assuming you can actually hit and pen your targets. It's also the burst damage. It's just so much fun to use, guys. This is what makes the AMX 1357 completely and utterly unique. Okay guys, let's check out this gun and this engine in action. We are back here on Kharkov again. And the story behind this game was played during the review. I was actually recording the review and I was complaining about how sluggish the tank was. And it suddenly occurred to me, this is the last footage I'm recording for the review at the moment, but it occurred to me that I've never driven this tank with premium consumables. So I've got premium consumables on the tank. I'm using the 105 octane, 10% engine power and turret traverse. I wanted to see whether or not the tank was going to perform better with the fuel, the consumables, so no fire extinguisher. What you can see is I'm playing as on the outsides or the outskirts of the town. Now I'm using my amazing camo rating, found in Ashorn, and you can see how quickly this tank unloads. And the fact, even though I'm firing before I let the gun aim in fully, I was still hitting most of my shots. So we've basically knocked an Ashorn down to low health, and you can see I'm trying to use bush mechanics using the amazing camo rating, and I'm not really playing as a support here. I've come over here and I'm planning to use my camo rating and see whether or not the tank handles better with the premium consumables. Now, I don't usually use premium consumables on very many tanks, but I figured that someone in the comments after this review is released would go, well, if I complain so much about the about the sluggishness, why don't I use fuel? So yep, I dropped the review, stopped recording the review, popped into World of Tanks, played this one game. This is the first game of the day and the only game I played in a tank. And it turned out to be quite a good game to show off the tank, so I ended up using it instead of the game I'd picked out for the review. You can see again, I've finally been spotted, but just putting shots in here, and unfortunately leave him on at 146 health. So get into cover, and someone else takes him out. So we're up to over 1,000 damage because I hit a couple of blind shots on the Nashorn as well. And we're moving on, but even with the premium consumables, the high octane fuel, the tank it still feels sluggish. It still doesn't feel like a lot of tier 7 light tanks do. Once again, using camo rating, going to try and put bushes between myself or cover trees between myself and my target. And I'm just waiting for targets of opportunity. So again, regular AP going through the side of a Tiger, looks like a stock turret. Missed that shot, but you can see again that the aim time is far slower than the reload. And I waste a shot. Now, this is something you can't do in this tank. You really can't waste shots, and I'm going to show you why in this game. The game I had originally picked out to show off the gun, I ran into exactly the same problem. But that game was about 4 minutes longer than this one, and didn't do as much damage. But anyway, I've spotted this Tiger 1. I want the Tiger 1. I've also spotted a WZ-131. I can pen the WZ-131. He's hiding behind buildings, so just move up. I was hoping I didn't get spotted. Unfortunately, I was. But this guy set him on fire, and this guy isn't using a fire extinguisher, so I'm quite happy with that shot. Just gonna let him burn. Unfortunately, because of the low alpha, it's low burn on the fire, but here we go. Tiger's angled. I'm having trouble tracking him, trouble penning him until I adjust my angle. 3 shots left in the clip, and once again a bounce on an angled Tiger, bounce, and I need to go for a reload. So in real life my crew would be hopping out of the tank to pop these magazines in again, but alright, I'm on a reload. I think the Tiger senses I'm on a reload. He's got annoyed at me, and I'm just trying to avoid. And again, you can see the acceleration, even though we've got a 61 km/h top speed. Even with the high octane fuel, the acceleration just isn't there compared to other light tanks. But WZ comes in, and once again, unfortunate to bounce on the WZ. Tiger's on the other side of the building. This guy's coming for me, and RT. But there we go. This tank, it's devastating against enemy light tanks when you get to unload. But this is a splash damage from RT, 190 damage taken from splash, and had to use a first aid kit. Forgot to see what crew member was knocked out, but okay. Anyway, we've got to relocate. And while it's not the fastest of light tanks, you can still relocate. I've still got 2 shots left in my magazine. And the reason I'm not reloading is if you look at my ammo counter, I don't have a full clip. I've run out of AP. I'm so low on ammo. I've done 2,538 damage so far. I just don't have the ammo left, so I decide to come up here and see if I can take care of this low health IS-3, more dangerous target than the Tiger. And then I realize, hang on, I've got no friends left. The only friend I have left is an IS-3. He's on 947 health, but he's in danger. He's being pushed by 2 tanks. 2 tanks on relatively low health. So I've run from the Tiger, and I've got to save this IS-3, because the problem with this tank is you just don't have enough ammunition. When you've got to carry games, you just don't have enough ammunition. I have to save this IS-3. So I put 1 shot in, take out the... Take out this Yak Panther. Unfortunately, take a big hit, which takes out my engine. I repair my engine rather than my tracks. So, yeah, this tank takes a lot of module, takes a lot of crew damage. There goes my first aid kit. There goes my repair kit. I've only got 2 shots left, and there we go. I'm out. So I've got 1 clip of premium ammo left. I've got 2 rounds of regular AP. There are 5 tanks left on the enemy team. And I can't win. I mean, no matter what I do to play this game, I can't win the game. So I decide to go see if I can get some RT kills. That's what I'm looking for. But the Lorraine was too fast. He got away. S-51 fires and misses, but oh, T-32 has come back to hunt me. And I figure, you know what? RT's moving into cover. I'm not really going to risk shots. I don't have the ammo, so I'll use these Rex as cover. I'm using premium ammo. Miss. Pen, bounce, pen, and die. Just, it didn't matter. No matter what I did in this game, I couldn't have won. So yeah, this game was not planned. I had another game picked out to show off the gun, but strangely enough, I ended up having exactly the same problem in that I ran out of ammunition with multiple enemy tanks left. I couldn't win the game, and this one turned out to be pretty much the same, but I chose this one because I had a feeling someone might ask me in the comments if I complain about how sluggish this tank is so much, as I will be in the rest of this review. Why haven't I used premium consumables on it? So I decided to use premium consumables, and I still think the tank is sluggish. I still think other tier 7 light tanks are quicker, accelerate quicker. It does improve the tank. Premium consumables do improve the tank, but it is going to cut into your profit margins in the long run. It was a defeat, no heroic medals. I think it would have been pretty close to an ace tanker if I'd picked up an heroic medal. But you can see what this tank is capable of. You can also see that I played it. Stopped recording during the review and decided to play this game. This is the one and only game I played today. Yeah, but you can do damage, and you can earn, you know, XP in this tank. You can play it as a support tank. You can abuse its camo rating. Camo rating is very, very good. But even with premium consumables, I still feel when I'm driving this tank that other light tanks would be faster, would accelerate faster, and would be far more maneuverable. But you can't take away from the gun. The gun is just great. I mean, you know, 3,422 damage in that game. Oh, admittedly, it was only a tier 8 game, but 3,422 damage done, and you know, running out of ammo towards the end, couldn't win the game. Tier 7 versus tier 8s, you know, I can't complain. The gun is great, the burst damage is great, you can use it as a sniper as long as you can pen enemy tanks. It's accurate enough, you could saw that the aim time is slower than the reload, so you've got to delay your shots a little bit, but the burst potential, the burst fire, very, very good. You also got to see taking a lot of module damage. I mean, I took, had to use a repair kit, had to use a first aid kit, can't remember what crew member was damaged on the tank, but got tracked and my engine taken out with one shot from an IS-6. So this tank does take module damage, it does take crew damage, but the gun is just the gun. I love the gun. It's just a pity about the tank it's mounted on. Great camo rating, but just a little bit too sluggish. It's definitely more of a passive scout than an active scout, but you know, even with premium consumables, even with 2 clips of premium ammo fired, which cut into my profit margins by a huge amount, we still earned credits, 33,000 credits in the tank. So the AMX 1357, you can make it work. So let's talk about crew, and we've got 3 crew members. We've got a commander, a gunner, and a driver. No loader, but as explained earlier, French tanks that have autoloaders don't use loaders because the entire crew exit the tank in order to replace the ammunition drums when the tank needs to reload. So no loader, but 3 crew members. Does that make it a good crew trainer? Let's find out. Taking a look at the tech tree, unfortunately the French have a lot of light tanks, and yesterday I did a Cromwell B review and I talked about how good the Cromwell B was at training even the low tier medium tanks for the British. And the AMX 1357 is pretty close because even though the French have a huge number of light tanks, starting off with tier 2, we've got a commander and driver, can be trained up. We're missing a gunner, but commander and driver is okay. The D1 is a light tank, and again, commander, driver, we're going to need an extra radio operator here, no gunner. So yeah, not a perfect crew trainer for the D1. Is the D2? D2 is a medium. Yep, medium. H35 is another light tank. The French have so many light tanks. Again, commander, driver, it's fine. AMX 3650 or FCM 36 is a light tank, commander and driver. Or 35 is technically a light tank. Again, commander and driver. These can all be trained up in the AMX 1357 as long as you have an extra gunner. Tier 2, that's a medium. That's a medium, and this is a light. Yeah, AMX 38. I'm getting tongue-tied now. I've been talking for a while. Commander, driver, perfect. AMX 40 is a light tank, and what we've got is a perfect crew trainer for the AMX 40. So for all of you sadists who still have an AMX 40 in your garage just for the lols, the AMX 3057 is a perfect crew trainer for the AMX 40. So commander, gunner, and driver. Perfect crew trainer. When it comes to the ELC light tank, what we've got is 2 crew members, so again, commander and driver, just like the lower tiers, and then we get up to the higher tiers. So the AMX 12T has exactly the same crew layout, commander, gunner, driver. AMX 1375 that we just talked about, commander, gunner, driver, and the pinnacle or the end of line for French light tanks is the AMX 1390, commander, gunner, driver. So it's a pretty much close to a perfect crew trainer, other than the fact that the D1 doesn't match. You can train up every French light tank in the game in the AMX 1357 as long as you have a gunner to put in if you're just doing light tank or lower tiers. Once you get to the mid tiers or higher tiers, it's a perfect crew trainer. Moving on to equipment. Before I begin, I just want to put a quick disclaimer down here because I've got equipment choices on this tank that I put on the tank day one. The day I bought this tank, even before I played it, even before I researched it, I put equipment on this tank, and that equipment is still there. I'm just too measly to pay gold to remove it. So even though I've got equipment on this tank, there is probably equipment I would replace it for. But anyway, thankfully there aren't too many equipment choices here. Toolbox, complete and utter waste of time on this tank. Yes, I know if you don't have a repair crew, I recommend a toolbox on most tanks, but this is a light tank, and that means it's normally going to be getting into higher tier games, and higher tier tanks are not even going to give you the time to repair your tracks with a toolbox on. They're going to 1-hit kill you, they're going to 2-hit kill you. I think it's a waste of time on this tank, even if your crew don't have repair skills. So moving on, filling the tanks with CO2, even though technically this tank has a 20% chance of fire when it gets hit, I think it's a waste of time. I think they're a better piece of equipment. Enhanced gun laying drive is completely viable on this tank, and I do have it on this tank because the reload is 1 second between shots. Your aim time is 2.2 seconds, so anything you can do to get your aim time closer to that reload is good. This tank doesn't have vert stabs, it does have a gun laying drive, so I've opted for a gun laying drive. I think it's viable on the tank. Coated optics is a little bit iffy because I love light tanks, and when I first equipped this tank, I put coated optics on thinking I'd play it more like an active scout. However, the AMX 1357 is not an active scout. It is much more of a support tank or a passive scout if the map gives you the opportunity to. So if there was one piece of equipment I would remove and replace, it would be coated optics. I would probably go for binocs over optics, because you don't need coated optics if you're playing on a city map, or if you're playing as a support tank. You probably would get more joy from binocs. But again, the choice is up to you. I haven't had that much issue with the coated optics, but I do think if you're playing it and setting it up as a passive scout, which is probably this tank's biggest strength, binocs would be better than coated optics, but choice is up to you. When ammo rack complete, another waste of time on this tank. Enhancing the suspension, this tank does not accelerate fast enough to enhance the suspension, so another complete waste of time. Camonet 100% viable. As I say, the tank is a passive scout if the map gives you the opportunity to. If you can't passive scout and you're playing as a support, then Camonet is still fine. So yeah, Camonet 100% viable on this tank, and I really should remove some other piece of equipment for it, but I'm just too lazy. A light spawn liner, complete waste of time on any light tank. Plus 20% armor protection isn't really plus 20% armor protection, so yeah, complete waste of time. And improved vents is something I do have on the tank, but I would probably remove, again, because I set this tank up the day I bought it before I had even played it. I would probably remove vents and put a camo net on. However, you know, I'm quite happy with my setup. I don't play the tank often enough to worry about equipment and trying to min-max the stats. I'm quite happy with just the coated optics, vents, and gun laying drive. But as I say, if I were to do this all over, I'd probably put a binocs, camo net, and gun laying drive on the tank and just use it as a passive scout and cross my fingers every time I hit the battle button that it would be a good passive scouting map. But as always, equipment choices are completely up to you. I just tell you what I think works and what doesn't work from my own experience in the tank. Okay folks, time for the overview game, a game where I show you as many strengths and weaknesses of whatever tank I'm reviewing in one replay. We are here on Redshire in a tier 8 game. Unfortunately, this is an older game. This is a game I picked out and played for the review when I was planning to do it over a month ago. But then the advent calendar hit and I ended up doing other tanks instead, so this was the original overview game I'd picked out for this review, and what you're going to see first of all is the acceleration. Here I'm not using premium consumables, and we're struggling to get over 50 kilometers an hour. But here on Redshire, this is one of my favorite little bushes, and what you're going to see is the amazing camo rating. I'm just checking to make sure none of my tank is poking out of the bush. So this is one of my new spots. The bushes to my left by those trees have been removed, the position has been nerfed, but what this position does is it allows you to spot tanks moving up onto this ridge. So we've just spotted the STA-2. I'm going to be getting a lot of assistance damage done in this game, a lot of spotting damage, a lot of assistance damage. So we've already gotten some assistance damage in the STA-2, now we've spotted a Borsig. We're just going to be patient, because this is what this tank is very, very good at. Be patient. I could double bush the Borsig, but I decide not to. Sometime my patience is going to be running out. CDC, I can pen this guy. He's taken a big hit, get more assistance damage, do a little bit of damage, haven't been spotted. The camo rating is just surprisingly good on this tank, and I don't think the tank gets enough credit for how good the camo rating is on it. Maybe because it's a hidden stat. But anyway, we're still sitting here. Now, in my mind, I've got an STA-2, I've got an AMX CDC, and I've got a Borsig in front of me. Now I've got a Type 64. I can pen and damage all of these tanks. So I'm just trying to keep visual. I notice CDC is on low health. I know that the Borsig is still around. But this is an assassin. And Type 64. What this tank loves is lightly armored targets on low health that you can just assassinate. Wait for your moment. I'm still passive scouting. There's no danger. I don't have to move. We're holding the south. You can see I'm still looking at the 9-0 lines. We've got plenty of tanks there. No pressure. We've got plenty of tanks on spawn. We've got plenty of on the cap. We've got tanks covering the 1-2 lines, although they're outnumbered, and that's when I decide to make my move. There's a T-29 moving across to support the 1-2 lines, but Borsig and CDC haven't been spotted in a while. And again, going downhill, you can see we got up to 61 kilometers an hour, but now we're going to go uphill, and this is where this tank struggles because we're dropping off speed. We're down to 40 kilometers an hour, even though we had a good run up. And the Borsig is just fired, so he's on low health. This is exactly what I wanted. Miss a shot. There's that poor gun elevation and poor gun depression, but look at this. It's an assassin. This is just an assassin. So I've done a drive-by, taken out the Borsig, and again, trying to go uphill, struggling. I mean, as soon as you go uphill in this tank, you lose all your speed, all your maneuverability, but I've gone for a reload. The tanks on the 1-2 lines were shooting at me, but the CDC's on a low health, so I'm trying to time my approach so that I've got my gun reloaded. I derp out by hitting the wreck. CDC's on very low health, and once again, you can see the gun depression here. I couldn't get a gun on the CDC. We get one shot into the Type 64, so this is a good sniper. It really is a good sniper. The accuracy is good enough to snipe with, but once again, I'm playing my assassin role. Moving up. Now, I've only done 620 damage. A nice shot in the move to take out the CDC. But it's about constantly moving. You can passive scout, but it's also a very, very good damage dealer when you give the tank a chance. So I've gone for another reload. Just 5 tanks left on the enemy team. I'm going to try and do some sniping from distance using a little bit of bush cover, but nope, no targets. Oh, KV-85. Moving back so I get some bush cover. Just need for him to give me a weak spot. And we sneak one in. There's that accuracy. We only had the back of his tank to shoot at, and we're able to sneak a shot in. So, always a question in autoloaders. Do you reload, or do you leave your clip? So, again, using bush cover, double bushing, and we can pen, even though we've got an orange reticule, we're penning the T-28 HTC. Unfortunately, I get spotted, and I take a hit from KV-85. So you don't bounce anything. Oh, derp hit the rocks there by looking at the KV-85, and that's going to cost me, because there we go. We've taken another hit, and we've lost our gunner. You lose so many modules, so many crew members. Pretty much anytime you get shot, there's a very good chance of losing your crew members and modules. Again, trying to adjust my tank, because the gun elevation and gun depression just really aren't good enough. It's just another minor problem this tank has, but only 4 tanks left on the enemy team. Don't need to worry about RT anymore. I'm on half health, or just below half health, thanks to that mistake. We've lost a couple of tanks now. There are 4 tanks hiding in the castle ruins. Most of our team seem to be sitting on G4, but they're moving down, so just want to see if I can find any targets, any easy targets I can assassinate. But you know, some very heavily armored tanks up here, like the Tiger P from the front, the T-28 heavy tank concept. So I've been spotted. Heavy tank concept was pointing at me, and even though we're not the fastest light tank, we still have the maneuverability. We're doing 40 kilometers an hour along here. Unfortunately, get proxy spotted, but the enemy tanks are focused on the tanks in front of them, and that means we can be sneaky. And this is one of the things that this tank is very good at. Be sneaky, move around, and find lower health enemy tanks to assassinate. So again, using bush mechanics, move up here. 1, 2, 3, set them on fire. 4, 5, 6, and we've got 2 shots left over, so go for another reload. So very quickly we're up to 1450 damage. Just the KV-85 left on the enemy team. He's looking at me, so gonna reverse around this corner. He's still looking at me. Oh, nope, he is not. So 1, 2, someone else nicks the kill. But yeah, it seems to be a very basic game. But yet, it was an ace, and, you know, pretty decent XP, 1383, and our damage wasn't particularly high. I mean, I've had bigger damage games in this tank, but the reason our XP was so high was because of the assistance damage, 2,704, and that's down to the camo rating of the tank. It is a very good passive scout, probably one of the better passive scouts in the game, but on the other hand, you've got to ask yourself, you know, would I have been able to do that in most other tier 7 light tanks? Probably I would have, but I might not have been able to get away with shooting and not being spotted in other tier 7 light tanks. So as a passive scout, the camo rating is very good. However, you also got to see how sluggish the engine was. very, very rarely did we actually reach 61 kilometers an hour. Most of the time we were doing between 40 and 50 kilometers an hour depending on the terrain. You also got to see the tank losing speed on hills. When you try to maneuver, go up hills, the tank loses a lot of momentum, it loses a lot of maneuverability. You got to see the fact you've got absolutely no armor. The two shots that were fired at us and hit us both penned. Admittedly, the second shot was a mistake by me, but you also got to see damage to crew members. I lost my gunner just because I got shot. You're going to lose a lot of crew members, you're going to lose a lot of modules every time you get shot in this tank. But you also got to see some gun depression issues and some gun elevation issues, because the gun elevation and gun depression aren't fantastic on the tank. But the gun is great. The gun is really, really good. 710 damage. We tore apart the Borsig. We were able to assassinate a lot of lower health tanks. We were able to move around the battlefield, so it's not the quickest of light tanks, but it's still maneuverable enough. It's sneaky, it's an assassin, it's a French autoloader, it's got a great gun, it's very unique, and it's a moneymaker. So we didn't fire any premium. You can see that the ammo costs were very low, the repair costs were very low. Now, one thing I might do is try and play this tank with premium consumables, see whether or not that helps the engine a little bit. But if I do, it's going to cut into my profit margins a little bit more, so it might not be the best moneymaker at tier 7 as a tier 7 premium. But overall, I think it is a decent tank. I think there are better tier 7 premiums. I think there are better tier 7 light tanks in game. But you can make the tank work. Okay folks, time to sum up. If the AMX 1357 appears in the gift shop, and it's currently available in the gift shop here on the EU server as part of the advent calendar, which is why I'm rushing this video out. I wasn't planning it for another couple of weeks, but Murphy's Law. But anyway, if the tank becomes available, is it going to be worth it? We might as well start with the positives. It is an incredibly fun tank to use with regards its gun. The gun, I love the gun on this tank. It's got 8 rounds on the clip. You can unload those rounds in 7 seconds. You can do 710 burst damage, and then you can do it again just 15 seconds later, and the accuracy is not terrible on the gun either. So it's a very, very unique and interesting gun. I love it, and it can be a lot of fun to use. So it's probably the most unique feature of the tank. Great gun. Other positives, it's got an absolutely incredible camo rating. It's got, the best camo rating of any of the premium tanks with the exception of a couple of lower tiers. It's got better camo rating than any of the other tier 7 light tanks. It's got better camo rating than any of the other tier 8 light tanks. I mean, a lot of people think the AMX 1390 has very, very good camo rating. Well, the 1357 has the camo rating on the 1390 beaten. So it's got better camo rating than the 1390. It's a very stealthy tank. You can be very, very sneaky in it. If you put a camo net, camo crew on the tank, put some camo paint on it, it can be a very, very sneaky tank. So yeah, it's got some of the best camo rating in the game, and as a result, it's also one of the best passive scouts in the game. Once you've got the equipment and crew skills, it can be a very, very, very good passive scout. It's definitely a better passive scout than it is an active scout. It's a premium tank, so you're usually going to make money in the tank. Now, I'm going to say it's probably, in my opinion, not the best moneymaker at tier 7 premium, as a tier 7 premium, but it's a little bit situational, depending on whether or not you get it into a tier 8 game or a tier 10 game, whether or not you can pen your targets, whether or not you do active or whether or not you do assistance damage, or whether or not you do damage yourself. So it's a little bit situational. It will make you money, assuming you don't have full gold loadout on it, don't fire all your premium ammo and miss it all or bounce it all. You can make money. I just think there are other tier 7 premium tanks that can make money better and have more favorable matchmaking. But yeah, it's a decent money maker. I just think there are better ones. It's a good crew trainer for French light tanks. It's going to train up every French light tank, or almost every French light tank, from tier 1 all the way up to tier 8. It's not perfect, however. I mean, most French light tanks from tier 1 up till tier 5 only have 2 crew members, so you're going to be missing a gunner, which means your gunner is going to need extra training once you finally put them in the tank. But once you get past tier 5, once you get to tier 6, 7 and 8, it's a perfect crew trainer. And I'm struggling to come up with any other strengths for the tank. Oh, the signal range. The signal range is very, very good, but at top tier, signal range isn't as important. So yeah, they're all the positives. Let's move on to the negatives. And the biggest negative I have about this tank is the fact it's sluggish. The power to weight ratio is very, very poor. It doesn't get a very good engine. Now, you can boost that with consumables. I didn't find it made that big a difference. It made a slight difference, but not that big. The fact the tank is sluggish means it's far better as an active scout. If you're into scouting, it's far better as a passive scout than it is an active scout. It means that, you know, enemy tanks, even fast mediums, fast heavies, can basically race you down. You just can't accelerate quickly enough to get away. You have problems maneuvering due to the fact your acceleration is quite poor. So yeah, it's a very, very sluggish tank for a light tank. I like my light tanks to be a little bit quicker. And, you know, while we're on the subject of traverse, I mean, the whole traverse of this tank is 48 degrees. The turret traverse is 45 degrees. Now, that's very good by heavy tank standards, or it's very, very good for medium tank standards. But, you know, when you put things into context and compare it to most other light tanks from maybe tier 5 up, it's not great. It's actually on the below average side. So for a light tank, I mean, it's agile enough. The traverse speed is okay. The turret traverse is okay, but most other light tanks have it beaten. And as I say, when you're traversing this tank, hull traverse, again, you're going to run into that sluggish acceleration, which just seems to slow the whole tank down. It was one of the biggest disappointments about the tank. The tank really, really struggles going uphill as a result of that poor horsepower to weight ratio, that poor engine. Staying with the negatives, yeah, the penetration on the gun is not amazing. Again, this tank is a light tank. It doesn't get special matchmaking. It gets light tank matchmaking. It's a tier 7. It will see tier 10s. So you're going to be seeing tier 10s with 143 millimeters of penetration, which is very, very disappointing. It's going to struggle even against tier 8 heavies occasionally. You're going to end up having to fire premium ammo. You're going to have to carry premium ammo on this tank. And there are going to be some tanks you physically can't penetrate, you know, depending on their angle or distance. So the penetration on the gun is very, very poor. And while still on the subject of the gun, you know, with the tank, you've got, 7 clips. You can carry 7 clips of ammunition with this tank. Now, assuming you hit and pen every single shot, the theoretical damage you can do with this tank is about 5,000, which is very, very good. But that, as I say, is assuming you hit and pen all your shots. And one of the issues I've had with the AMX 1357 is you don't hit and pen all your shots. And quite often, what you're going to find is you just run out of ammunition. And, you know, I showed you an example earlier on of, you know, not having enough ammunition left to win the game or to be able to finish the game strongly. A replay I cut out of the review, which I was going to include, is another exactly the same situation where I just physically did not have enough ammunition to finish the game. There were 3 enemy tanks left, they were all on low health, and I had no ammo left in the gun. So you're going to find yourself running out of ammunition. Even though your theoretical damage is quite high at about 5,000, you're going to find yourself running out of ammunition a lot in this tank, assuming, as I say, you're still alive towards the end of the game. And that brings me to the armor, because this tank has absolutely no armor. So when you've got a tank that's very, very sluggish for a light tank and has no armor, it means your survivability is going to be very, very low. So, you know, even surviving to the end games, it can be quite a challenge. You're also vulnerable to other light tanks, as they can pen you very, very easily. Occasionally you're going to bounce off them, and you can't clip them. So, I mean, you've got 710 damage per clip. That means you can't clip an enemy light tank. You might, you know, unless they're lower tier. Enemy light tanks can hunt you down while you're loading. They can ram you to death. You're a very, very light tank. I've been rammed to death by enemy light tanks while I'm in this tank because I only weigh about 15 tons in the tank. So, well, I don't. The tank does. Yes, you're very, very light. You're very, very susceptible to ram damage, and you've got no armor. So other tanks or even other light tanks have no problems taking one of these things out if they get the drop on you. On the other hand, if you get the drop on them, you can do 700 710 damage in 7 seconds. The gun depression is not great on the tank. It gets 6 degrees of gun depression all around, which is not amazing. Sometimes it actually feels worse. It really does feel worse than 6 degrees, but 6 degrees is not good in the first place. Might be okay for a medium tank that can go hull down, but this thing has no turret armor. So, you know, trying to get your gun on target with 6 degrees of gun depression means you've got to expose your tank, and that's always dangerous when you're in a tank that doesn't have any armor. Gun elevation on the tank is also very, very poor, and it takes a lot of crew and module damage. Because it's such a small tank, you know, again, I'm going to show you in comparison to something like the T-71. T-71, much bigger. T62 compared to the 1375, you know, much narrower, much smaller, which that basically means that, once again, a bit like my Cromwell review yesterday, you've got a lot of crew members and you've got a lot of modules all sitting in a very, very small area, and when you get shot, you're going to be taking crew damage, you're going to be taking module damage, you're going to be using a lot of first aid kits and repair kits, assuming you live long enough to be able to use them. So another just small negative for the tank. So overall, I don't hate the tank. I know it may sound like that because the tank seems to have far more negatives than it has positives, but I will admit it can be fun to play. It really can be fun to play, and mainly down to the gun. You know, dumping 710 damage into someone and then doing it 15 seconds later. It can be a lot of fun to play, but, you know, I've got to be realistic, and it's a light tank, and you know, a lot of the player base don't like light tanks. So, you know, if you don't like light tanks, there's no point in buying this one because it's a light tank. But even if you do like light tanks, if you're a light tank player, you enjoy playing light tanks, I've got to be perfectly honest and say that, you know, it's not an amazing light tank because, yes, you could play it as a support tank, you can play it as a damage dealer, you can do that with any light tank, but when it comes to light tanks, you know, you can be passive scouting or active scouting, and, you know, as a passive scout, I think it's very, very good. As an active scout, I think it's pretty bad. There are a lot of better light tanks if you want to play actively, and the reason people like light tanks is the fact they can play actively. This one, I don't think it's a very good active scout. I think it's a passive scout, and that's pretty much it. Otherwise, you're playing it as a support tank, and you can do that pretty much in any tank, so nothing special there. So even if you like light tanks, I mean, it's not amazing. As a crew trainer, this is the next thing. I mean, it's a very, very good crew trainer. Not amazing, but it's a very good crew trainer. But, you know, when it comes to light tanks and premiums, I have always got to ask myself the question, you know, light tanks finish at tier 8, and, you know, there aren't usually very many light tanks in a nation's tech tree, so, you know, what would be more value for money? You know, a heavy tank crew trainer or a light tank crew trainer that finishes at tier 8? So unless you're incredibly serious about training up French light crews, I mean, there aren't that many good French light tanks to hold on to other than the 1390 and the ELC. So, you know, you're not going to have that many French crews to train up in the first place for in a French premium light tank. So, you know, is it something you really, really want for crew training, or is it something you can do without? Because, as I say, the line finishes at tier 8, you're not going to go beyond tier 8, so you're not going to get as much bang for your buck out of a light tank trainer as you are out of something like a heavy tank trainer, or a medium tank trainer, or a tank destroyer premium tank. But having said that, I mean, if you enjoy playing a tank like the AMX 12T, assuming you've got it and have played it, if you enjoy playing the AMX 12T, I'm sure someone out there actually does. I hated that tank personally. Or maybe, you know, if you prefer playing the AMX 1375, if you enjoyed playing the AMX 1375, I think the performance on the AMX 1375 is a little bit better as regards engine and acceleration, but not by much. But if you enjoyed playing the 12T or the AMX 1375, then you're probably going to enjoy playing this tank. I mean, the differences are quite small between them. They play very, very similar. They're assassins. You can play them passively. You can play them in support roles. But you'll notice I'm not mentioning the 1390. So if you like the 12T or the 1375, you'll like this tank. Go ahead, get it. But if you like the AMX 1390, then I've got to be honest and say this tank doesn't get special matchmaking. It will see tier 9s, it will see tier 10s, just like the AMX 1390 at tier 8. I would much rather, in every single situation, ever, be in an AMX 1390 than the 1357. I mean, the gun is fun, the gun is amazing, but the AMX 1390 is just such a strong tank compared to this that doesn't have the acceleration and the traverse issues that this tank has. The camo rating may not be as good, but it's still a great tank, and you know, a 1390 will outperform an AMX 1357 in almost every single situation. I know that it's a tier higher, but they're both French, they both see tier 9s, they both see tier 10s, but the 1390 can handle tier 9s and 10s very, very easily compared to the 1357. But what makes this tank unique is, you know, the gun. I mean, that's pretty much it. The gun makes this tank unique. It's a very unique tank, or a very unique gun. But if you're a tank collector, you're going to want this tank because of the gun and because of the rarity. I mean, this tank doesn't go on sale. This is only the second time ever the tank has gone on sale. But if you're simply looking for a tier 7 premium tank, then don't touch this one, because I think that there are a lot of tier 7 premium tanks that are very, very strong, that are much better value for money and are much, much better crew trainers and much, much better money makers. As a tier 7 premium tank, I don't think it's amazing. As a collector's item, I think it's very, very unique. But overall, because it's up against some incredibly strong tier 7 premium tanks, I'm going to have to say it's not worth it. I don't hate the tank, but it has a lot of problems. You need to play around those problems and understand the tank to get the best out of it, and then it's still going to be situational. It's going to be team dependent, it's going to be map dependent, and it just doesn't forgive any mistakes whatsoever. So yeah, it's not a great tier 7 premium tank. I'm going to say it's not worth it, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.